Namaste, nerds. This is your friendly neighborhood budget pub stomper, Navanad, and we're going to be doing part 2, so the second in our 2-part series on budget staples for budget competitive commander. This is budget staples part 2, budget Boogaloo, right? Clearly. So before we get into the list proper, I wanted to go over some of the cards that didn't quite make the list. Now, if you didn't see the first part, the first part was all about the Wooburg staples, the single color, Wooburg top 10 or so budget staples for budget competitive commander. So in this second installment, we're going to go over artifacts, lands, and multicolored spells. And so these are all cards, before we get into the list proper, that I had on the list and I took them off the list, and maybe I put them back on and took them off. These are ones that are honorable mentions, to say the very least, and I'm just they're ones that I think you should have on your radar, kind of keep in your back pocket. They should be part of your arsenal if you are building kind of a specific deck. Like, for instance, Buried Ruin. It's only 31 cents. It's obviously really powerful, but you're not going to play it in a 3-color deck very often, and you're not going to just slide it into any deck. It doesn't quite meet the criteria of what I would call a staple, but there are going to be decks that you absolutely want this card in. And when it is a card that you want in your list, it's often going to be a very important card. Like if you're building a $100 deck that uses Sensei's Divining Top, because it's an expensive card, Top is, that means you're probably building all around Sensei's Divining Top. It's probably a very important part of your strategy if you're spending whatever it is, $15 on a single card. So if you're playing something like the Reality Chip, or any of those cards that combo with Sensei's Divining Top, then you're definitely going to want Buried Ruin. But there's not that many of those decks, so I didn't think it really should make the list proper, though it's close. Aether Vial. This is one that is going up a little bit at a time. If this were at $3, and I believe that's where it was at its lowest after it got, I believe, 2 reprints, this would be on the list proper at $3. At $4.15, it's super close. This is like your most honorable of honorable mentions, because I do put this in a good number of decks. I've got this. I'm actually testing it in a couple of cEdh lists right now, and so far I think it's been really good. I mean, I've only resolved it a couple of times, but it's been really, really good. It kind of provides a form of ramp, but it also allows you to kind of get around summoning sickness and break timing restrictions. So in our kind of budget format, maybe you're trying to win the game with like Laboratory Maniac and who knows, Divining Witch. But Divining Witch really needs haste. It's a very fragile body. It's a 1/1. It's a demonic consultation on a stick. Costs 2 mana. So you don't really want to put that out, put it into play and then pass the turn to everybody and just hope that it gets back to you. A better plan might be to flash it into play with some number of these cards that allow you to break these timing restrictions, like Aether Vial, Born Upon the Wind, Valley Floodcaller, that kind of thing. Well, no, Valley Floodcaller doesn't let you play creatures at instant speed, but I digress. Disruptor Flute and Phyrexian Revoker are two that, they could very easily make the top 10 list, and honestly, it's a top 11 list. But there's just other effects that do kind of the same thing. I do think Phyrexian Revoker and Disruptor Flute are probably the best two. And if you're not familiar with this effect, and there are getting to be a kind of a lot of versions of this effect, but Phyrexian Revoker or Disruptor Flute, when you cast them, you name a card, and then activated abilities of that card cannot be activated. Now, just the Phyrexian Revoker is a creature, which is nice, and the Disruptor Flute, you can play at flash speed, and it also has some extra text here, where it says spells with the chosen name cost 3 more mana. So these are good kind of staxy effects. Guttural Response, this is super duper close. Personally, I only have one actual Gruul list in paper, and it does play Guttural Response. Part of that is the fact that it's only 52 cents. Now, I think this card is probably pretty strictly relegated to exactly green-red, like Gruul no other color lists. As soon as you get into really any other color, you're probably going to have more and better options for disruption, interaction. But if you're in exactly the two colors, green and red, you've got Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast, but those are getting expensive. You've got the two Veils, but one of those is probably out of budget. So Guttural Response can be a really good option for just trying to get your wins through. Jeweled Amulet, this is one that's been on my staples list since I started playing in this quasi format. And it is good. It still is even though it's $10, it still does make a couple of my decks because you're just really very limited in this budget. On this budget, you're limited in terms of turn 1 ramp. I mean, if you're not playing the color green, there's a real premium on ramp spells that you can put out on turn 1. So in like my Malcolm Kedis deck, which is a pretty cheap deck to build, all things considered, so you do have a little bit of slack or leeway, I still run Jeweled Amulet in that deck. Mind Stone, this is another one that could make the list, could not make the list. I didn't quite add the Snarls, although they do show up in some of my lists. I think they just get notched out by just slightly better budget options. Whispering Madness, you're going to know when you want this card, but I think that it's good that you know it exists. This is a wheel effect, and it's got this cipher text where you can cipher it onto a creature, and then whenever you whack somebody with that creature, you can copy and kind of make another version of the effect, which can come up. You can do that in some decks. It's not going to be in all that many decks, although I do find myself running this in a number of black-blue decks. Like if they're black-blue based, or maybe if it's black-blue-white, kind of a control-style deck. But I normally play Whispering Madness in decks that are really trying to weaponize this wheel effect. Soul Guide Lantern, there's just a lot of effects like this. This is a good one. It's definitely one that you could choose if you're playing sort of a staxy deck, or I don't know, if you just, it's kind of a meta call. So let's get into the list proper. Let's do the most kind of boring thing first so I can keep you guys on the hook for the full however many minutes this video is. So Battlefield Forge, I chose it because it's actually the least expensive. Well, I started choosing some because I just wanted to represent the color combinations a little bit better than I was. But also, this one's 89 cents. So if you are playing a deck that has the colors white and red anywhere in its color identity, you almost certainly want Battlefield Forge, and that's going to go for any color combination. Although some of the pain lands, and these are just the lands that you can tap for colorless, or you can tap them for one of two colors. But if you do, then they ping you for one. So they're like talismans on a land. But if you're in a color that has these that are, I don't know, 250 or under, definitely include these in your decks. These are a really big boon for budget mana bases. Command Tower obviously goes without saying. You just play this in every 2+ color deck. Copperline Gorge. This is one that you should know about. You should know about specifically the fact that it's been reprinted enough that you can actually afford it. And they're very, very good for budget decks if they're not going to break the bank. Like, I probably wouldn't mess with these much over $3. Obviously, there's a lot of context required to say that exactly. But they're ones that you should know about. Exotic Orchard should be in, I'd say, any 3-color deck. Probably realistically will have to run Exotic Orchard or want to run Exotic Orchard. And even in some 2-color decks. And kind of my rule on that is I play it in 2-color decks under 2 conditions. If the colors that I'm running are well represented in my meta, and if I don't have access to a lot of inexpensive dual lands. So if you're in a color that doesn't have, 80-cent pain lands, if you're in a color that doesn't have the 75-cent filter lands, then Exotic Orchard can be a good option. Or if you're playing a 3-color deck, I think you just put it in. It's a Felwar Stone on a land. It taps for mana of any color that your opponent's lands can produce. Gemstone Mine, speaking of, this is down to 34 cents. It wasn't that long ago that this was well over $10. I want to say like $15, $16. Then it got reprinted and it dropped, and it's 34 cents now. I don't play this in a lot of 2-color decks, although I think you can make a pretty good case for including it in exactly proactive, fast 2-color decks. And I think as soon as you get into 3 colors, especially if you're doing like a a 3-color deck that's trying to go kind of quick, this is an easy include. It's another one of those really good pieces that makes it, actually makes sense to try and mess around with 3-color decks at $100. Gemstone Mine, if you're playing 3 colors, put it in. It taps for a mana of any color, comes into play with 3 counters on it, and you tap it, remove a counter, add a mana of any color to your mana pool, and then if there's no more counters on it, you bury it, which means you sacrifice it. That drawback is not as detrimental as it probably sounds to some of you. You got to figure if you're keeping a hand that has this land in it, it's probably got a land or 2 beside it. And you just play this land last, or you play it when you need to play it, and you don't use the counters unless you need the counters. So if you play this on average on turn 3, you'll be able to actually tap it for mana on turn 3, turn 4, and turn 5. And a lot of times if you're in a proactive deck, you've won the game by turn 5, or you've pretty much shot your, I want to keep this PG-13. Since when the fuck am I worried about keeping things PG-13? If you have blown your load, then it probably doesn't matter anyway. So in a lot of the kind of turbo slanted budget decks that are 3+ colors, this is an auto include. In my book, it's an auto include. I already spoiled Rugged Prairie, but well, I guess you can see the cards, right? Rugged Prairie, this whole cycle of lands is absolutely fantastic for 2-color and maybe 3-color decks. It really fixes your mana better than just about any lands can. It will tap for colorless too, just on its own, which is big. But in a 2-color deck, you can, if say you're playing red-white, if you're in strictly Boros, then your red or white lands can assist you with, they can assist Rugged Prairie in producing red-red, red-white, or white-white. So you can tap a red land in this, and you can get 2 white mana out of that. Or you can tap a white land and get 2 red mana. Or you can tap either a red or a white land and get 1 red, 1 white. So it helps if you've got pretty specific pip requirements, and if you're in a color combination where you can pick up your version of this land for less than $1, just jam it. Just slot that in. If you're in black and a 2-color deck, these tainted lands are they're one of the best. I think they're one of the best includes. They're an absolute auto include for me if I'm playing a 2-color black deck. The tainted lands, there's one of every color combo, pretty sure. And they tap for colorless on their own. They don't enter tapped, that's the big thing. And then you can tap them for either black or their specific color if you control a swamp. And if you're playing a 2-color deck in budget competitive, if one of those colors is black, you probably control a swamp. Or you can arrange to control a swamp. Dragon Skull Summit. Again, this is representing all of the cards like this. These are the buddy lands, check lands. When it enters the battlefield, it'll come in untapped if you control either a swamp or a mountain. For the black and red one. This was reprinted, I think, in the Vagavoth precon. So this is down to $1.11. These are really, really good. These are I would say this is almost like I don't know if I'm going to say gold standard. I don't know if I'm using that right here. But this is sort of like par. This is your par for the course. Any land that is better than this is fantastic on a budget. And any that is worse than this, you have to kind of think about a little bit. These are your kind of just kind of basic duels. Basic duels? That doesn't make sense. Go with it. You know what I'm trying to get at. What have we not talked about? These guys here. Okay, so this is one that enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 basics. This is going to be worse than Dragon Skull Summit. It's going to be worse than the whatever these are called. Dragon Skull Summit enters tapped unless you control. I think these are the check lands. So Canopy Vista is worse than a check land. So it's kind of on the low end of your dual lands, but at 17 cents, you see in budget competitive, you have to take that into account, right? So it's not actually obvious to me which one is a better land, all things considered, between Canopy Vista and Dragon Skull Summit, in the perspective colors. Because yes, Dragon Skull Summit is obviously the more powerful card, but it's also $1.11 where Canopy Vista is 17 cents. So I'm inclined to actually say that if you have a mana base that can support something like Canopy Vista or whatever your color's version of that effect is, you probably just ought to play it, right? Now, you have to be playing kind of a lot of basics. I mean, you have to play a lot. I wouldn't play this even in a 3-color deck, but if you're playing a 2-color deck, and a 2-color deck that can get by without, that doesn't have really awkward mana costs. If you have like, maybe you are playing green and white, and you really just want to hit your green mana early and then your white mana late, something like that, where you can afford to just run out basic and then Canopy Vista. They're just obviously going to be very good. And it's not always the end of the world if this enters the battlefield tapped. I mean, if you've got, if your starting hand has 3 lands in it, and you have a lot of basics, so either one of those lands is a basic or you can expect to draw into a basic, it's either going to be the case that you can go basic on turn 1, basic on turn 2, and then Canopy Vista on 3, or you can play Canopy Vista out on turn 1, and if you didn't have a turn 1 play anyway, and this isn't true cEdh, so very often you won't have a turn, fairly often, maybe depending on the deck you're playing, I'd say about half of the time I don't have a turn 1 play, and if it's that half of the time, then this is just a dual land, right? Now, the other nice thing about these, and where they do get a little extra boost of power, especially the green ones, the green X ones, is it is a forest and a plains. So any of your effects that allow you to search for exactly a forest or a plain, you can get with this, like your 3 visits or nature's lore, or even the cycling cards, the basic land cycling cards. You can get these, and then there's some other cards that require you to have specific land types to turn them on. So maybe Dragon Skull Summit, for instance. See, this cares if you control either a swamp or a mountain. So if you had the red-black Rakdos version of Canopy Vista, that would qualify for Dragon Skull Summit. So these play pretty well together, and you're going to find just a lot of effects that are going to play well with the fact that you have a basic land type, 2 basic land types on your dual land. I don't think I want to spend a whole lot more time on lands because it's kind of the most boring subject. But these peat bog, these depletion lands, I want to draw your attention to these. When I say I often don't have a turn 1 play, I would actually count peat bog, or whatever color's version that you're in. So if you're in blue, I think it's Seprazin Scary. What's the red one called? It's not Dwarven Ruins. Oh, I've got Dwarven Ruins on the list, but it's Needlestone Verge, something like that. But each color has one of these ETB tapped lands that comes in with 2 depletion counters, and then you can tap the land, remove one of the 2 depletion counters to add 2 mana of its color to your mana pool. I count these as turn 1 plays. Like in my Malcolm Kedis deck, I'm very happy to start the game with the red or blue version of this peat bog effect. Now, it's something to say that some of them are more expensive than the others. They do range a bit, and I think the blue one's kind of getting up there. I think the red one's like $250. But in a lot of decks, it's still going to be worth it. This is going to get you to your... Basically, if you're playing a low-color deck, like 1 or 2 colors, with a 3 CMC commander, that's a pretty big part of your game plan, I would say you probably want to get these. I mean, they get up about $3 or $4. Maybe you second guess that, or second think that rather. But if you're able to put if you're playing a black and white deck with a 3 mana commander, then you probably should run Peat Bog. The fact that it goes away, remember, this isn't casual commander I'm talking about. We're not talking about games that are going to go 8, 9, 10, 11 turns. We're talking about games that typically will wrap up on turn 4, 5, or 6. And so your ability just to play this on turn 1, and then on turn 2, ramp into a 3 mana thing, and then on turn 3, ramp into a 4, or depending on what else you played, 5 mana thing, it can absolutely be worth it. I think they're slept on, and I actually play one of these in my cEdh, my fully tuned, budgetless, IRL, cEdh Malcolm Kedis deck. I've tried a lot of different, at one point I had the depletion land, like Peat Bog for blue and for red, and I also had Dwarven Ruins. And I ended up getting down to just one of these but that's in a cEdh deck, and the deck's probably like a, I don't know, $3,000, $4,000 list. So if you might want to play a 90-cent card in a $4,000 deck, you probably do want to play the $100 version of, or you do want to play it in the $100 version of that deck. Did I go over all the things? Dwarven Ruins is one that, again, I think this is one that if you have, how do I want to say this? If there's a specific mana cost that if you can hit, you probably win the game, you maybe should play this. And so I'm thinking of like Turbo Ad Nauseam decks, or if you're playing something like Godo. If you're playing $100 Godo, you want to count to 11 and then you win the game. If you have, I don't know, one of the decks that uses the polymorph effects, that once you can get your polymorph spell fired off, you probably win the game. Dwarven Ruins makes a really good addition to those decks. I like it in the Malcolm decks because, it does kind of stink that you have to sacrifice it to get the 2 mana. This comes into play tapped. You can tap it for its color. Well, actually, this isn't available in all the colors. So we'll just say Dwarven Ruins comes into play tapped. But you can always tap it for a red mana, and you don't have to remove a depletion counter. You can just tap it for red with no penalty. And when you need the extra ramp, you can tap and sacrifice it, and you get 2 red out of it. So tap and sack for 2. So if you're playing a Malcolm deck, a Malcolm red deck, going turn 1 Dwarven Ruins into turn 2 Island, tap the island, crack this, and play your Malcolm. Then you've got a turn 2 Malcolm, which will let you curve into turn 3, say cEdh, and now you don't ever have to worry about mana for the rest of the game, assuming you can keep your Malcolm in play, but we're not going to go down that tangent. So those are the lands that I think that you should be looking at. Obviously, there's way more, but these are the ones that I thought were the most important ones to draw your attention to. If you're not aware of this, if you weren't aware of some of these even existing, then I think you just got your money's worth watching this video. If you didn't know there was such a thing as tainted lands, having access to these in your Black X decks for like 14 cents should be worth the price of admission. Rugged Prairie, if you were not aware that these were so inexpensive, because for a long time these were $8, $9, $10 cards, and some of them still are like $4 or $5, pretty sure. But if you're in a color combination that can get these for, if you're in a 2-color deck and you have access to these filter lands, and yours is say $2 or lower, probably jam it. You should probably run these. I mean, I've been very, very impressed with them. I think they're fantastic. You can go like, turn 1, play this, tap it for a Soul Guide Lantern or a Soul Ring, and then on your next turn, you just play any red or white source, and now you've got like whatever mana colors you need are just kind of covered. So if you didn't know that these existed, now you know, and if you didn't know that they were so inexpensive, then now you know. And if you hadn't considered playing lands like Peat Bog or Dwarven Ruins, definitely the guys play these, run these in your budget decks. Run these; they really are very, very good. The thing to keep on your the thing to get your head around is that these games don't last that many turns, and the faster you can produce big chunks of mana, the truer that's likely to become. Moving on to the artifacts. Now, I didn't want to just jam all the mana rocks, but what I did was I put, not like a smattering, but I put the most important, the most critical color fixing rocks in here. So we started with Arcane Signet. Obviously, that's going to make most of your lists, and I would just say it will make most of your decks. Now, it doesn't make all of my decks, and kind of the way that I sometimes will not, the reason that sometimes I don't play Arcane Signet would be if I'm in a mono green deck where I just am playing a very dork heavy deck. I think a lot of times you just don't need them. 1 mana ramp tends to be better than 2 mana ramp, and you don't need the color fixing, and so they don't make my Selvala or Marwyn decks. And if I was going to play 2 mana ramp in a mono green deck, I might go with land ramp anyway. Maybe not. But Arcane Signet is going to make most of your decks, most of your one-color decks, almost all of your two-color decks, but not all of your two-color decks, not all of them. The other place where I don't include them is when I'm trying to curve into a turn 2 3-mana commander. So Malcolm again comes to mind. I don't play these in any of my Malcolm decks, not in cEdh, not in budget. I don't think you want them. Even in the cEdh version, you might think, well, cEdh is doesn't have all that much ramp available, so you kind of have to take what you get, especially when you can get something as good as Arcane Signet. But I actually think you would be wrong about that. My Malcolm Kedis list is able to very, very, very consistently come up with a turn 2 Malcolm. And so since that's what you're trying to do, the Arcane Signet just doesn't fit in your curve. You're going to go turn 1 Skirk Prospector, turn 2 Malcolm, turn 3 Kedis, and you never needed the Arcane Signet. So what I found was when I included Arcane Signet in my budget Malcolm Kedis deck, and obviously it was in there at first, it was always the card that I was discarding to Glinthorn Buccaneer to get the combo started. And that's low marks. If it's always the card you're pitching, then it's probably one you could take. It should be painful to pitch a card, And Arcane Signet was always just sitting there for me, making my decision easy. So yeah, Arcane Signet should go in most but not all of your decks. I don't play it in all of my green decks, and I don't play it in my decks that... I don't play it in all my green decks, and I don't play it in my non-green or green plus decks that are trying to ramp into a turn 2 3-mana commander. Selvala, Marwyn, Malcolm Kedis, Malcolm Tana. I don't play Arcane Signet in any of those decks, but I play it in virtually every other deck. Very good. I probably don't need to tell you guys how good Arcane Signet is, but I think it might be useful to think about the times when you don't want to run Arcane Signet. That might not be as obvious. Azorius Signet. So this is a stand-in for all of your Signets. Your, tap 1 Colorless, tap the Signet, make 2 mana of your respective colors. These are good, not great. They don't tap for mana on their own, which means if you, go turn 1 land, turn 2 land, Signet, you can't play another thing, right? So, or if you draw this on turn 3, you can't tap 2 lands to play your... you get the idea. It doesn't tap for mana on its own, which is a real bummer. That's a real downside. Now, on the other end of that coin, it does mana fix, and a lot of them are very inexpensive. So if you're playing a deck that... you're going to put these in most of your 2-color decks. Honestly, you're going to play most of the Signets most of the time. But maybe it's more useful just to think about what they're comparable to. Obviously, Arcane Signet is the best for mana fixing. Then I go with the Talismans, and these have been reprinted a lot lately, and these are down to, this one's 24 pennies. That's fantastic, right? These are going to be better than these in most decks. But if you have something like if you have for whatever reason, you're a masochistic person and you decided that you're going to play a Wooburg Commander at $100 budget, you probably want to play the Signets. If you're trying to hit like very specific mana costs, these can be better than Talismans, but for the vast majority of decks, it's like Talisman. Well, it would go like this. If I were going to play 2 2-mana rocks in my, say, 3-color deck, number 1 is Arcane Signet, number 2 is Felwyrstone, and number 3 would be whichever talisman is the most important. Most of the time, you just play all the talismans. So if I were going to play 5 2-mana rocks, and I think a lot of times I will play exactly 5 2-mana rocks in my 3-color decks, it would be Arcane Signet, then Felwyrstone, and then your talismans, right? What else do we have to talk about here? So much. I actually feel like the artifacts ended up being sort of interesting. I wasn't counting on that. I thought I was just going to end up putting 10, make that 11, sources of ramp. But that's actually not the case. In fact, a lot of these are exactly the opposite of ramp. Like Thorn of Amethyst. Man, this is down to 35 cents since the, I think it was Brothers War reprint here. This used to be expensive too. This is a damning stax piece, especially against like fast proactive stormy decks or against control decks. So if you're playing a like hate bear based deck or something that's trying to beat people down, if you're playing a very creature-based deck, any deck that can break parity on this effect, this is just it's a absolutely horrendous thing for many people to see hit the other side of the table, or one of the three other sides of the table, as it were. Thorn of Amethyst, there's decks that cannot win through it. There's decks that just, their whole battle plan just got thwarted, and now their only plan is get rid of Thorn of Amethyst. But even that gets a little complicated sometimes, because when you're removing a stax piece, and take this as a piece of advice if you're not used to playing more competitively, you don't want to just remove a stax piece because you don't like it. First of all, there may be somebody else who doesn't like it more than you don't like it. And so in a way, maybe the onus is on them to do it. And even if both of you hate it equally, if you can get that person to remove it, then you are kind of cutting out of both of those players. One player wasted their turn 2 to play Thorn. Another player tapped their 3 mana for a disenchant to blow up Thorn, and you didn't have to do anything. But the kind of most critical thing to understand about when to remove a stax piece, you don't want to do it if it's going to unlock somebody whose turn happens before yours, right? So if you're playing against a Storm deck, and maybe you're in seat 1, and player 2 plays Thorn of Amethyst, and player 3 is playing a Storm deck and seems like they're in a pretty good winning type position, do not blow up the stax piece before their turn. Now after they pass the turn, and you're going to blow these up, basically, this is the situation where you're going to blow up these stax pieces. It's going to be exactly on the end step before the turn where you plan to win, most of the time. Now there's caveats, there's going to be exceptions to that rule. Sometimes you just need to blow it off the table because it's affecting you and it's not affecting anybody else, and you just feel like you're falling behind because of it. Sometimes you'll just have a very a big turn that's going to kind of catapult you into the lead if you're able to take the turn, and this thing is kind of stopping you from taking that big turn. But most of the time you want to wait until the end step before your untap on the turn that you're planning to win to remove the stax piece. And that's why stax pieces are so good in the format. It's because, when your opponents are good, right? Because it sort of creates this game theory, this GTO scenario where everybody wants the piece gone, but nobody wants to be the one that removes it. I can't believe we're at 37 minutes already. Time flies when you're having fun. We haven't even got to the fun stuff yet. Okay, so let's get moving. Basalt Monolith, this is another one of those cards that if you have a specific number and that number is higher than, say, 4 that you're trying to get to, you're playing a polymorph deck, an ad nauseum deck, you're trying to resolve Peer into the Abyss, you're trying to count to 11 with Godo, you probably want to play Basalt Monolith. I think that more people should play it than do play it. And also, if you have a combo that uses Basalt Monolith, then you want to play Basalt Monolith. This is a combo piece. It combos with a lot of different cards. You have synergies with it, but there are actually just A plus B combos that, Mesmeric Orb in this will mill your entire deck out. If you have this with Kinnan, you have infinite colorless mana. And there's other things that do that. There's the new mono blue piece that makes clues and reduces activated abilities of artifacts. So there's ways to go infinite mana with this, and it can be just a good kind of useful card on its own right. We talked, kind of add links about all the color fixing rocks, and but there's some really cool effects too, like Grafdigger's Cage. This is one of the most damning stax pieces in the format. It's really, really hard to play against if you're in a cEdh deck that's doing broken things. It really just says 1 mana, your opponents can't do cool shit. Creature cards in graveyards and libraries can't enter the battlefield. Players can't cast spells from graveyards or libraries. Think of all the decks and combos this shuts off. In cEdh, it shuts off Breach, but here in our kind of quasi format, it does a lot to stop decks like Protean Hulk decks and just tons of stuff. Your Hoarding Broodlord lines get shut off by this. It doesn't say that you can't cast creatures from the graveyard. It says they cannot enter the battlefield from the graveyard, which is different. There's a lot of maybe you have one of your tutors that the 2 battlefield tutors like a Lively Dirge. You can't use Lively Dirge with this. Grafdigger's Cage shuts off Magda, pretty sure. Creature cards in graveyards and library. Yeah, it shuts off a lot of what Magda is trying to do. So Grafdigger's Cage is, it's one that's, if you can break parity on it, if you're not playing anything that this stops, you should probably just put it in your deck. I think it's really that simple. Curse Totem, man, this is so awful. It's so horrendous when you're playing a dork deck and somebody drops this damn thing. And that's not the only kind of deck it works against, but it works specifically against dork decks. So if you are playing a not dork deck and your meta has a bunch of dork decks, probably jam this. 76 cents. I remember the original version of this was $20+, and I bought one. It used to be an absolute cEdh staple. Now, my prediction is, now that we're moving into this new world post-Dockside where mana dorks are good again, I never thought they were bad, but people are playing TNT again. I never stopped. I've always been a Tim Thrasios believer. But Curse Totem just totally shits on those strategies. Kinnan is still very much alive in the meta. When you play Curse Totem, Kinnan is about half as alive as it was before you played Curse Totem. But in our format, I think this is even better than it is in cEdh. And at 76 cents, the price, the bang for the buck, where that's not really a consideration in cEdh, well, it very much is a consideration in our piece of the format. And Curse Totem, if you can break parity on this effect, make a spot for it. It's not even $1. Hope of Ghirapur, this is a silence effect. And I was going to say for colors that don't have silence effects, but really at this budget, at $100, like a lot of decks don't have access to silence effects. Maybe you play like a copy of Silence in a mono white deck, occasionally in a 2-color deck, but silence is not cheap. But Hope of Ghirapur, it can be an evasive attacker for your like Yuriko style decks. It can also just be the thing that shuts off your, like say you're trying to combo off. Where do I have this? I've got it in a couple decks, but I'm thinking specifically of a proactive combo deck. Dahada. So in my budget Dahada deck, this it has a lot of synergy with legendary things and recurring creatures from the graveyard. And Hope of Ghirapur does work with those strategies, but also if I'm playing Dahada, what I'm looking to do is just totally go off and win the game out of nowhere on one turn, most of the time. And so if I can have Hope of Ghirapur out, I fly it into the person that's playing blue and has 2 untapped mana, and then I sacrifice Hope of Ghirapur, and it says until my next turn, that player that I just hit with this Hope of Ghirapur can't cast non-creature spells. Now that can be a little bit of a double-edged sword, but I think you don't want to. This has a little bit of that kind of defense grid pass feel to it, but it's not like that exactly. But I would just say, without going into a huge long like paragraph tangent about it, use this as a silence when you are looking to win the game on that turn. Run this into the person that's likely to have the most ways to stop you, then sacrifice it, and then win the game, not having to worry about that guy's interaction. Use it as a silence. That's what I would say. I think that's all the things in here. Now we're moving to the interesting stuff. So these are the cards that I think were really the most worth talking about, and the hardest list to create because there's just so many good cards here. I mean, I had to put a tutor. Perplex is just a transmute card. It's very rarely going to be used for anything else, which is why it didn't make it to the list proper. So I had to drop this into the honorable mentions, Whispering Madness and Guttural Response. I mean, those are all 3 very serviceable budget cards. But look at this. Look at this just embarrassment of riches that we have in the multicolored budget cards. And all 11, which is approximately 10, cards in this entire list add up to $10.31. So you can get all 11 of these cards average out for less than $1 each, and I think you should. If you're serious about getting into this format, there's nothing I don't think you're ever going to regret owning any of these cards, and I think there's a good chance that most of them just will climb up and up and up in value until they see a meaningful reprint. Abrupt Decay might be the best piece of removal in the format. Like it's got to be like top 3. I'm thinking of this and Swords to Plowshares, and honestly, the other piece that would rival it is Escaping Memory. I don't know what the other piece would be that might be in contention for top removal. I think Abrupt Decay is better than Path to Exile. I think it's better than anything black has access to, like mono black. Abrupt Decay, the fact that it cannot be countered is very big. And the fact that it only hits things of mana value 3 or less is almost meaningless in this format. Maybe that's a bit of a stretch. And since that is maybe a bit of a stretch, Assassin's Trophy actually starts to look like maybe in that same top 3-4 removal spells in the format. And they're both in Golgari. And they're both fresh off of multiple reprints, so they're both very affordable right now. If you're playing a just strictly black-green deck, if you're playing just Golgari at $100, you should play both of these. If you're playing a 3 or 4 color deck that includes these colors in its identity at $100, you probably should play both of these. I guess that kind of does depend, but almost certainly you should be jamming Abrupt Decay in any deck you play that is $100 and can run it. In fact, because I was kind of stuttering there because I'm thinking, like, I think I play this Abrupt Decay in every cEdh deck that I have that has these 2 colors. Now, I don't have a ton of them, but I would play it in Malcolm, not Malcolm, Timna Tana. I would, I do play it in my Sultai list, which is, it's Thrasios with Armix Thras. Abrupt Decay is just a fantastic, it's a cEdh staple. And where a card like Assassin's Trophy has kind of more or less been power crept out of high color cEdh decks, you'll still see Abrupt Decay in 5 color lists. It's super, super good. Don't sleep on it. Assassin's Trophy in our format is almost as good. This has the advantage of being able to blow up bigger things, which absolutely can come up. It's not that common, but it can come up. The problem with Assassin's Trophy in budget is that your opponents are actually going to be playing basic lands, so it's kind of got the Path to Exile clause where they do get a little ramp out of it. But still, play it in all your Golgari decks and probably most of your Golgari plus decks at $100. Azra Oddsmaker. This might not look like much, and if you've not played this card, it probably doesn't read that good. But I've played with it, and I've played against it, and I think this is absolutely stellar. In our format, we don't have access to all the best value engines, especially in Rakdos. And this is a value engine. So it's just a 3/3 for 3. And it says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may discard a card. If you do, choose a creature. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player this turn, you draw 2 cards. So what this essentially is going to say is, like, say you've got Hope of Gyrupa out and you've got Azra Oddsmaker in your hand. You cast Azra Oddsmaker, so you don't even have to worry about the fact that it's got Summoning Sickness. Then you go to combat, and at the beginning of combat, you say, okay, I'm going to discard a card. So you just discard whatever card you don't need, and you choose Hope of Gyrupa. And when Hope of Gyrupa hits somebody, you draw 2 cards. So it's basically just allowing you to discard a card and draw 2 cards almost every turn. And even if you don't have evasive threats, in our format, a 3/3 is a pretty stout body. Azra Oddsmaker is going to get through. It's going to cause your opponent to have to make a chump block that they probably don't want to make, or it's going to get through. And it doesn't have to be Azra Oddsmaker that gets through. It can be any creature. Maybe you've got a big fat creature with trample, and you can use Azra Oddsmaker ability on that creature, or you've got an evasive creature and you use it on that creature. But even if it's just a lone threat by itself, most battlefields are going to have at least one opponent where they're not going to have a profitable block, and they're going to have to let you get through, and then you're going to be able to get 2 cards off your 1 discarded card. There's also decks that I play this in, and a lot of the Rakdos decks will be like this, where I actively want to put cards into the graveyard. I'm trying to reanimate a Razakath or a Hoarding Broodlord. And so you can pitch the Hoarding Broodlord. And so it's all upside, you know. Ezra Oddsmaker, well, this should tell you how good I think it is. It made the list where a 3-mana Transmute Tutor did not make the list. And Guttural Response didn't make the list. And Whispering Madness, a wheel at 90 cent wheel, did not make the list. And I stand by that. I think that it is a better card than any of those, generally speaking. Dimir Infiltrator can actually be... So this one I think is really good. If you're in the colors, there's a really good chance that you want this. It's a Transmute 2 cast cost. So it's a 2 CMC Transmute card. So that means you can pay 3 mana, discard this, search your library for any 2 CMC card, put it in your hand. And that's not counterable. It's not you're not casting it, you're just discarding it. So you can pay your 3 mana, discard this, and uncounterably tutor up whatever you need. And in some of the black-blue base decks that you're going to be playing, just having the unblockable body is big. Like, there are decks where you're going to play this out as a 1/3 creature that cannot be blocked. I'm thinking of Yuriko mainly, but not necessarily just Yuriko. There are lots of creatures that give you lots of advantage for whacking through in combat. Maybe you've got your Azra Oddsmaker in your Grixis list, and you want to have a way to continually get through. Or maybe you've got Professional Facebreaker, Grim Hireling. There's lots of cards that you could have that would actually make you want to have this as a creature in play. So the card itself has text on it. That said, it's usually a tutor. This is a 2 CMC is a very common, how do I want to say this? A common CMC value for very important cards. This is going to be your Isochron Scepter. This is going to be your Dramatic Reversal. This is going to be your Cursed Totem if you're trying to shut off a Dork deck. This is going to be your Assassin's Trophy or Abrupt Decay if you absolutely need to get rid of something. It can be a lot of the interaction pieces that we play, like Dovin's Veto. Pretty good little segue, huh? Dovin's Veto, blue-white. It's a 2-mana counterspell. This spell can't be countered, and it counters target non-creature spell. It's $2.90, but I still think it earns its keep. Now, if you're playing a 3-color deck, probably it doesn't make the cut most of the time, but in exactly blue-white, this is a staple. Put it in your deck. We're all doing combo things, right? And if I want to counter your combo, if I use Dovin's Veto, the conversation's over. So this is one that, you can use it in a counterspell war to protect your own things, but it isn't as good there. Because if I play my whatever combo and you cast counterspell, well, I can Dovin's Veto your counterspell, so you can't counter the Dovin's Veto, so your counterspell is going down. But then you can just, go one step ahead and just put a counterspell on the stack that counters the original thing that your counterspell was countering. So I'm going for my game-winning spell. I cast game-winning spell. You cast counterspell. I Dovin's Veto the counterspell. You can still counter my original spell. But if one of your opponents is putting their game-winning combo on the stack, they play their combo card, and you counter their combo card. That is the end of the conversation. So it just stops them from winning the game. It specifically stops them from stopping you from stopping them from winning. Did you follow that? If so, you're getting a good ear for Navanad. Drown in the Loch, this saw some play in cEdh. I still see it crop up very occasionally. Depending on the list, it can absolutely be worth an include in cEdh. There's just so many good, there's so many powerful cards in cEdh, and you're relegated to exactly black-blue with Drown in the Loch. That said, this should be on your radar in any powerful deck that's base Dimir. What's it do? What doesn't it do, It's a counterspell. Let me just read the card. Black-blue, instant, obviously. Choose one. counter target spell with mana value less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. So if you're playing a strategy that's using a lot of wheels, you're doing like one of these wheel thief type builds, or any number of other ways that you're arranging for things to get milled, then this, well, it just gets really that much better. Even if you're not, we're playing in an interactive environment where people are firing off, removal spells and counter spells and even cantrips, and so this is very often going to just be counter target spell. So it's counter target spell with mana value less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. And then secondarily, the other one you can choose is destroy target creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. So this can be a counter spell. It's almost always going to be live for 1 mana spells. It's almost always going to be able to kill 1 mana creatures. And then it's very often going to be able to kill even the biggest threat on the table and counter the game-winning threat. This is it's just a really it's modal. It's a very versatile. It's a very versatile card. Drawn in the Lock, I think, goes in every black-blue deck that I play. Then again, most of my black-blue decks do have wheels in them. Mayhem Devil, awesome card. cEdh card. It's a really good little hate bear. In our format, it cleans up dorks like nobody's business. It's sort of like our budget Bowmasters. And it can be a part of a win condition. If you've got a way to generate infinite sacrifices, this will it'll allow you to get a win with one of your dual caster mage twin flame combos post combat. Lots and lots of utility here. It's a stax piece. It's a win condition. It's kind of everything you want. It's a 3/3 body for 3, which is a big creature in our format. 3/3s are stout. What have we not talked about? Neoform is one of the best cards on the list. If you are playing Simic, chances are this should be in your deck. I'm trying to think if there's any Simic decks that I don't play this in. I think the answer is no, there are not. Or Teamer. I mean, if you're just playing, this goes in almost every deck in our format, or quasi format, that has the colors blue and green in them. There's so many creature combos, and there's so many just like fantastic value creatures that the ability to just turn a mana dork into a devoted druid, or a Manglehorn into a notion thief. It's just it's got a lot of utility, and sometimes it's just going to turn your 2-drop into Glinthorn Buccaneer, and you're just going to win the game. Neoform is a 2 battlefield tutor. It's in the Storm decks, like the actual Marvel superhero Storm deck. It's like the key piece of all those decks, or a key piece of almost all of those decks, all the good ones. Moving on. I have entirely lost my voice at this point. Apologize. I'm not telling you to apologize, although I think you should. I'm apologizing. Notion Thief, if you're not familiar, this is a one-time cEdh staple. It actually, I would even say it made certain cEdh archetypes viable or even possible to build. Like Opus Thief was named after this card. That was the original version of T&K, like the Tymna and Crom decks before they were Blue Farm. There were really interesting mid-range value-based versions of those decks that were called Opus Thief, that were kind of based around playing a bunch of wheels and a bunch of ways to just kind of crack the wheels in half, like to weaponize the wheels, like Narset Parter of Veils, Notion Thief. I think some of the early builds even played, what's that white creature called? I don't think it's on my list, but it could be. Alms Collector. It's not on my list, but Alms Collector. So just ways to wheel your opponents out of cards. Or Notion Thief, just if your opponents have draw engines or value commanders that are drawing cards, and you flash this into play with the right timing, you can get a lot of value off of it, and it makes a hell of a stacks piece. So it is a combo piece that can be part of an A+B virtually win the game. If you're not following me, let's say since it has flash, And let me read the card. 4 mana flash. If an opponent would draw a card except the first one they draw each of their turns, instead, that player skips that draw and you draw a card. And I actually didn't say that right. It's if an opponent would draw a card except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps. Instead, that player skips that draw and you draw a card. So that means the only cards your opponents are allowed to draw when you've got Notion Thief in play is their one normal card per draw step. So if they cast a Brainstorm and you flash in Notion Thief in response, then they don't get to draw the 3 cards, you do. So you draw the 3 cards for their Brainstorm, but they still have to put their cards on top of the library. It's a total blowout. Or if somebody casts just a draw X spell and you flash this in, or somebody else casts a Wheel of Fortune, well, a wheel effect, and you flash this in, you've probably won the game. Or if you're playing Windfall, you can go in-step Notion Thief, untap, cast my Windfall, or cast my Honorable Mention, Whispering Madness, and now your opponents discard all of their cards. They don't get to draw cards, and you get to draw all of the cards that you were supposed to draw and all of the cards they were supposed to draw. So say the highest card hand was 5, which is far from Christmas land. If your opponents had 1 card, 2 card, and 5 cards in their hands, you all draw cards equal to the person who discards the most cards. So you in-step Notion Thief, and then you cast your Whispering Madness. Everybody discards their hand. And then instead of everybody drawing up to 5 cards, you draw your 5 cards, and then you draw each of your 3 opponents' 5 cards. So they all go hellbent, and you have 20 cards in your hand. You've effectively won the game. I would say most of the time that's just a win. The vast majority of the time that is just going to be a win. Ring Sight, this is one that I want to talk about because I think people are sleeping on it. I think it's partially because they don't understand the rules text. So it's 3 mana. The ring tempts you, which is just some whatever, doesn't matter very much. Almost flavor text, but a little bit of value. Then search your library for a card that shares a color with a legendary creature you control, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle. The most relevant thing about the ring tempting you is that when that happens, you are able to turn one of your creatures into a legendary creature. So when you do that, it turns your tutor on. So if you've got, you're playing in a Sultai deck and you've got Llanowar Elves as your only creature in play, that's not a legend. That doesn't mean you can't use Ring Sight. You can cast the Ring Sight, and then when the ring tempts you, you turn the Llanowar Elves into a legendary creature. Then you can search your library for any green card. Now obviously, every deck is built around a legendary creature that has the full color identity of all of the cards in their deck. So most of the time, if you just have your commander in play, this is just 3 mana Demonic Tutor. I mean, there's some caveats, but very often this is 3 mana Demonic Tutor if you're in the colors, if you've got your commander out. This is one I don't see people play enough. Wear Tear is busted. This is a super, super good piece. Like 1 white mana to destroy target enchantment. When you actually have an enchantment that you want to blow up, 1 white mana instant speed is fantastic. I mean, you can play Disenchant in this format, and it's totally fine. It's a good card. Tear, if you're looking to target exactly an enchantment, is 1 white mana, instant speed, destroy that enchantment, no downside. It's not got to be 3 mana value or less. They don't gain life. It's just blow up that thing for 1 white at instant speed. But Disenchant blows up artifacts or enchantments, right? Well, yeah, but so does Wear Tear. You can actually use the Wear part and destroy target artifact for a white and a blue. Here's the crazy thing that I think some people maybe are not aware of. For only 3 mana, 1 colorless, 1 red, 1 white, you can fuse the cards together. You can cast both halves at the same time. Then you can destroy for 3 mana. You can destroy target artifact and destroy target enchantment. Now, how is that not a staple? It's a staple in all of my Boros decks, and I think it should be a staple in all of yours as well. It's super powerful. It's 1 mana interaction, 2 some of the time, And when you need to blow up 2 things, and you actually need to blow up 2 things, 3 mana, destroy target 2 things is pretty damn good. Does that conclude my list? Do we have anything else that we want to talk about? I think that's it, guys. Thanks for hanging in with me. I really did not expect this to go so long. Why do these videos take so long? Well, thanks for hanging in there with me, guys. Until next we meet, may all your outs be live and all your women be... I kind of have done the woman thing a lot lately. Let's get off that. It's kind of making me feel creepy. Word to your mothers, word to your brothers, may peace be with you and also with you. May the force be with you and also with you. East side until the day I die. Word to your mothers. Namaste, nerd.